You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 212 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj, Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, we say a farewell to Aurora. It feels like we're doing this a lot lately, saying goodbye to Heroes Living Legend. I mean, we knew this was coming in terms of how quickly we would be saying farewell to Heroes as they hit the Living Legend timeline. We're going to talk about some things from the latest dev talk, and we're going to have a little bit of a look at another meta shakeup for the last 2 weeks of ProQuest season Singapore, with Aurora hitting Living Legend and having a little bit of a discussion about which decks that we are potentially playing this weekend, next weekend, and what we think might happen next before we get to High Seas, the 2 final weeks of competitive play before we head on to those High Seas, Pankaj.
Lots of meta shifts happening. And yeah, to your point, we did expect a lot of this coming, which I think some people might have forgotten, but literally at the start of this year, we were looking at the Living Legend leaderboard being like, okay, there's like 3 or 4 heroes that can reasonably LL within the next few months. Like, we knew Viscera was going to go. We knew Zen and Enigma were going to go as well. I think the one that came as a surprise to many people is Aurora leaving, but that's obviously because we didn't fully know about the Armory deck yet and stuff like that. But yeah, lots of changes happening. 2 weeks from now, we're going to get... Well, 2 weeks from now, the season ends, so we have 2 weeks of this pocket meta, and then High Seas comes out, and we have like another pocket meta, and then New is probably going to LL shortly after that, and we have another pocket meta. So lots of pocket metas happening recently and going to come as well.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about in the news this dev talk that happened last week, which I think is one of the most impactful. I haven't listened to it yet, but I've had the TLDR, and Pankaj, I know you've gone through it, so you'll be my Sherpa on this one. But it seems like one of the
Shame have not watched the dev talk. What are you doing?
You know I'm busy. You know I've tried. I will watch it this weekend. But it does feel like one of the more impactful kind of recent messages from James and LSS, James and Brian, on what to expect next. So we will talk about those things. But how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
I played a ProQuest this past weekend. I brought New again. Once again, your crusade to stop me from bringing New to ProQuest has not succeeded. But this time
will this weekend.
Go so well for me.
I feel it will this weekend, though.
Oh, I'm not playing a ProQuest this weekend, so technically
there you
true,
go.
I guess. Exactly. Yeah, I'm not bringing New to a ProQuest this weekend. So yes, you have succeeded in your quest. This time, this ProQuest didn't go so well for me. Went like 2-2-1, and then I dropped. Just things didn't quite line up for me this past weekend. How was your week in Flesh and Blood?
Dude, I've got a curse on me, Like, honestly, I can't discuss any matchups anymore because I just straight up curse myself. So if you recall, last weekend I played, so not this past weekend, but the weekend before, week 2 of ProQuest, I played one ProQuest, I played Scepter Florian, or I guess I'm just going to call it Florian because actually you play Reap and Blend into a lot of matchups now anyway. So I played Florian in the second week of ProQuest, and I spoke about, at that time, I was like, come on man, you can't be playing New, get off New, and I lost to New in the final after an insane game. And then this week I spoke.
People can tech. People can tech for you apparently.
Yes, but they weren't teched. They weren't teched. They were playing CYB New, and I lost the matchup.
Okay, never mind. All right, carry on.
But we will talk about tech in a second because we spoke about it literally last week. We were speaking about the shift into the Earth meta. Even now, even before Aurora hits Living Legend, but definitely as Aurora hits Living Legend, we spoke about, where Florian sits, what Verdance will do. We spoke about the Florian-Verdance matchup, and we both agreed that, there's a lot of shifts to come in that matchup, and people are going to start to tech and change the way they play the matchup.
But I did say I do think Verdance comes out on top once all the settling happens, because she just has the answers, right? Like,
yeah,
you can't fatigue her because of Evergreen.
I'm not sold on that still, but definitely the shift I saw. I played against a top forward this past weekend. Ran into Verdance. The conversation we spoke about happened. They were playing tall spells like Swell Tidings, all these things, and Scour,
Evergreen?
Remembrance. Although I don't actually think that's as relevant for the matchup, the way you play the matchup. But the tall damage is really hard to deal with when you're giving them these 3 and 4 card hands that they can use super efficiently with Waning Moon plus like Millennium Tree and obviously tall spells. So lost that one. So this week on the pod, just not going to talk about matchups. Just screw it. I'm kidding.
I mean, that is most of our main topic, so I'm not sure how you're going to avoid that. Did they play Evergreen into you?
No, but I've heard people talk about that. But I don't think it's a fatigue matchup, so I don't really understand that. But
Well, it's there to hedge, because I think some Florians might go for, like, it's weird to say some Florians
I just don't know how you can
go for the strategy.
fatigue Verdants. Like, they're just going to kill you. They're just, like, if they're playing any amount of these tall spells and like Scour Remembrance, like they're just going to destroy you before you even get to that point.
Scour Remembrance, yes, but I feel like if I have to put Remembrance into my Verdance deck and the Florian isn't trying to fatigue me, I'm going to feel really, really bad. Whereas if I have Evergreen and my Florian opponent isn't trying to fatigue me, I still feel a little bit better about that. Because I know a theory that's been pushed around is Florian's like, I'm just going to set up a bunch of rune chants with Tiara, and then you can never die. The combo never goes up from the Verdance, and then eventually they run out of physical damage, and then it becomes a deterministic draw. If the Florian never swings something to send the rune chants, and a Verdance simply cannot combo because there's rune chants and Tiara. That is what Evergreen, in my opinion, insulates you from on the Verdance side.
How does Florian win that matchup, though?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no. So Florian doesn't win. That's a deterministic draw from both sides.
Okay, but that's not a strategy. That's not a good strategy. That's still a loss. Flesh and Blood has double losses, effectively. Like, that is not... that makes no sense to me.
I suppose, yeah, but that's something I've heard people throw around. So,
yeah, but
you just put Evergreens, and then that never happens.
People want to do all sorts of dumb stuff. I mean, that's just not good. Oh, yeah. But you're very happy to die on that hill. That is a terrible strategy.
Yeah, but I do think once the dust settles, I just feel like Verdance just has the tools to answer Florian. So I'm gonna continue to stand by the statement that I think Verdance is favored into Florian, and will be once everything settles.
I think it wasn't the first 2 weeks of progress. I think as people are shifting and adapting, I think it definitely you start to free up the space that you had to consider things like Aurora, and you can start to change the way that you build your deck to make sure you can have that good matchup into Florian.
Yeah, exactly. It was, obviously, the first couple of weeks, Verdance had to deal with Aurora, and then now it's like, Florian's a big bad, and Verdance like, cool, let's make sure I don't waste my Scours, and then you just play that way, and I feel like Verdance should come out on top.
Yeah, I need to play the matchup some more. I'm definitely going to try and adapt that matchup. I got a few ideas, so we'll see.
I've been hearing about CMH in Florian, potentially. I'm not sure how good that'll be into Verdant specifically. Actually, it would be pretty decent. But
I think that matchup used to be, like, if I think about PT London meta, like, I think that matchup looked a lot better for Florian than when they were playing Channel Mount Heroic and they were playing this more aggressive Florian list. So, I don't know, maybe that is the way.
Which is funny. Maybe it's the Enigma tech. Because CMH was the Enigma tech, right? And you bring it back for Verdance now? Let's go CMH Rune Rager Swarm and just try and just kill the Verdance.
Whatever.
Because the Verdance does need to bring in the no-blocks, right? They have to bring in the rampant growth stuff into Florian. I think. Maybe if Florian stopped playing that way, maybe they don't anymore.
Yeah, but this is the thing. Okay, we can talk about this in the main topic, but I think the matchup is actually maybe one of the most fascinating matchups we've had in a while. It's going to revolve around a lot of adapting week on week, so it's quite interesting.
It'll be fun. All right, so before we do that, let's move on to the news, and we will spend a little bit more time on the news than typical because we will talk about the dev talk and just talk about that for a little bit. The news on the Arsenal Pass Patron side is a new in-house replay analysis. It's my game as Verdance into a teammate of mine, Syndra, so go ahead and check that out for your Patreon. And Hayden has a Reinhard deck tech coming on.
Oh, yeah, boy.
To the Patreon for it, and I'm quoting him, for the copers out there.
That is my quote. Yeah. I look, misguided or not, I spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks being like, is this like, we can talk on the main topic of the pod, but in terms of the meta right now, but I think if you're gonna decide to pick up Reiner like this week or next week, might be the 2 weeks to do it, because I don't think when High Seas hits, it's gonna be where you want to be. So.
I mean, I echo that. I actually think Reiner, and I'm going to say Leviah too. I know you don't agree with me, but I do think the good Leviah players who know how to navigate Earth, I think they're pretty happy at this current meta. Also because of kind of where Kano is going to land. We'll get to that main topic. Spoiler for the main topic a little bit.
Don't forget the good Tickle Blossom players. They're ready to be out this week as well.
Aside from that, Battle in Minneapolis was this past weekend. It was won by Andrew Rothamel on Kasai, which is very, very interesting. Was not expecting Kasai to win. Was not expecting Kasai's representation, to be honest. She was the 4th most represented hero at that event, and Aurora was still legal at this event, by the way. So not only for her to be the fourth most represented, for her to also win was pretty surprising for me.
Yeah, I mean, I was very surprised. I mean, there's been some talk about Kasai. I know, like, some of the circles that I run have been talking about Kasai over the past couple of weeks. Like, is this Kasai? Is it an option? Obviously, you know, especially if you're going to see the rise of Draconic Ninjas, right? With Valiant Dynamo, like, is that a time where you want to go back to Kasai? Interesting to see it before Aurora has even hit Living Legend, and also interesting to see it in an Earth meta. I'm not quite following in terms of, like, I looked at the list, and granted I didn't see any of the games, so, you know, maybe in the comments people can kind of provide me where they think Kasai matches well into Earth. But from my perspective, I was surprised at this week being the time to bring Kasai, and also the result from Andrew there. I mean, you know, maybe Andrew's just too goated and it doesn't matter, you can play whatever.
Honestly, yeah, could definitely just be Andrew skill gapping and diffing people. A very, very strong player. Next in the news, Aurora has Living Legended. She has ascended and she's out of here. Very, very, very fast for a Living Legend. It's been the fastest since Starvo, I believe. Less than a year. I forgot the actual. It's like 200 something days.
Which was faster, Starvo or which one was faster? Aurora or Starvo? Who LL faster?
Starvo was faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Starvo was out. I don't know what... Starvo definitely hit 1,000 Living Legend points faster than Aurora did. I don't know whether... Because at that time they weren't doing like weekly L thing, I don't know whether that impacts whether he ended up being long... No, I'm pretty sure he was gone like instantly. He literally alive for one season and then he was gone. Like, okay. Everfest came out, and what was the set after Everfest?
Oh gosh.
It wasn't Dynasty, was it?
No, it was a core set, so it was
Uprising. It was Uprising.
Uprising.
Right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and he was gone by Uprising. So like he was literally gone before next set came out.
Literally 6 months. Yeah. It's 5 months.
It was funny because he also almost lapped because they weren't doing weekly LLs. He went halfway through LLing like twice because he ended like when he was actually banned, it was like 1,500 LL points, which is really, really funny. If he lasted as long as Aurora did, I think he probably reached like 2,000, which is hilarious. Next in the news, spoiler season starts next week. Our card comes out. Oh man, I did not. 15th May, I want to say?
15th, yeah, correct. 15th, yep.
Yes, 15th May. Yep, so look out for that, and obviously look out for all the amazing spoilers we're going to get. Now, I do want to bring up, again, I feel like we talk about this every spoiler season, but every spoiler season, it feels like something is different. And in this case... I hope I'm not making this up, but I feel like in the lead up to Hunted, by this point, we at least had a bunch of expansion slot cards to mull over and look at before the spoiler season for Hunted main core set cards were previewed over the 3-day period. So I have been like, where are the expansion slot cards? How do you know nothing else that's coming in the set aside from what we've seen so far already from the pirate and the 3 classes in the core set?
Yeah, I think they've just... Yeah, you're right. They've just done it differently this time, I think. I also think they kind of look to do it around what they want to hype up from the set. And because the set is so unique, introducing Pirate, introducing Necromancer, I think they really wanted to not take any of the shine away from those two aspects. And so not necessarily focus on the expansion slot cards, focus in on the core of the set at London. Obviously, that's what they primarily focused on. We haven't had that week. We had previous where about this time... in a week we had, or over the course of 2 weeks, we had content creators showing maybe expansion slot cards that were relevant to classes or heroes that they were known for. So I think it's a little bit different to what we've seen previously. But I mean, the amount of cards is fairly healthy.
I guess, would you say that getting the expansion slot cards in the weeks leading up to Hunted preview season took away from the hype on Hunted? Because I'm not entirely sure I follow how those two things are linked.
I don't know if it necessarily took away from it. I mean, naturally, I think it does to some degree because the Hunted expansion slot cards kind of sucked. I don't know. I think it can take away from it. Like if there's a powerful card that is for a class that isn't involved in the set, maybe it takes some of the focus and people's hype away from the classes and the core of the set itself. So that's just speculation from my side. That's just what I'm reading between the lines on. Could well be that they've decided to do it for different reasons.
Yeah, I don't remember how many cards we had known like the week before preview season for the Hunted, but I think to your point, the volume does seem to be approximately the same. Like, we didn't have a lot of the main core set cards of the Hunted at this point. I think we knew the heroes and we knew the Agents of Chaos, but I think a lot of the bulk of the cards that we knew were expansion slot cards. And over here, this time it seems like we have more core cards, if you will, and not all of the expansion slot cards, which is interesting. I was just expecting to know more expansion slot cards by this point, but you brought up that the volume's roughly the same, so cool. Next, the new dev talk dropped, and before we get into, I guess, more detail into what was discussed, I do want to preface this by saying I really enjoyed how candid they were on the dev talk and how transparent they are, and how they're very, very... this has been consistent over the past few dev talks, but it's just very refreshing to hear the company, if you will, admit, in a sense, to be honest, I think to some extent they were a bit harder on themselves than they needed to be, but also they sort of admit their mistakes, and it's very refreshing to hear that, and it's not just a whole bunch of PR speak. And I think you brought up at the beginning that this has been one of your favorite new pieces of content that they've put out, and I definitely want to echo that. It's something every time there's a new dev talk that comes out, I sort of make it a priority to listen to it as soon as I can.
Clearly, I don't. Just in terms of those that, for the maybe 1 in 1,000 people that don't know what a dev talk is or what we're talking about. So this is Legend Story Studios, fabtcg.com's, I guess, podcast, effectively, that they put out generally monthly, which involves the developers, usually hosted by Brian Gottlieb, lead developer. I'm not going through his title again. It's so insane. But he kind of runs that with either the developers, or occasionally James will come in and the two of them will break down more. Usually the dev talks, I think, when it has the developers on, they talk more meta. They talk more about like the season. They might preview a pro tour, for instance. When James comes in, usually it's a bit more about the game, shifts in philosophy, things that are happening around Flesh and Blood at a macro level. And that's what this one was this week. So if you want to check it out, go to YouTube and check out on the Fab TCG YouTube channel their dev talk.
And I also like how in tune they are with community topics and discourse that's happening. You can tell that they consume content and they have their ear to the ground. Because, for example, in this dev talk, something I wasn't expecting them to discuss, but they did, was price of the game and discussions around ELO, which are both sort of hot topics that have been happening in the community recently. For those people who are active on X, or at least follow a bunch of content creators on X, both these topics have been maybe not as hot topics like the
the ELO one's interesting to me. The ELO one's interesting.
But there was it was because that was also happening, and to my point about how in tune they are, the fact that they brought that up as well means that they were also familiar with the not as hot a topic as Aurora LLing, but even the ELO discussions that were happening, and I thought it's just great that the developers are listening to what's happening, even if they aren't actively engaged on Twitter and stuff, which is great that they're not, because I don't know, that would just be terrible.
That's for the best.
All right, moving on to some nuggets of information that we got from the dev talk. First one I want to bring up, the Armory deck misprint. Now, Hayden, you and I actually knew this beforehand because they told us in London, but obviously we don't want to say it. But yeah, they mentioned that the Aurora Armory deck had a misprint in it. In the dev talk, they actually didn't go into detail as to what the misprint was, but Brian tweeted it afterwards, which is that Serenade's Go Again was supposed to be an option. It was supposed to be a mode you choose on the card. It was supposed to have 4 modes, and Go Again was one of those modes, rather than innate to the card. So that was an interesting nugget of information.
Yeah, just to, I guess, preface that in terms of being at the event in London, being I guess contractors in that sense to cast the event for LSS, we aren't privy to additional information. This one just happened to be an odd one where James came off the
Well, specifically because they wanted to bring up in the dev talk in London.
I was about to get to that.
But then, yeah, exactly. Sorry, you go on.
James came off the stage after the dev talk, said hello to me and Pankaj, And then we were speaking about the meta this weekend, and he asked what we thought, and you mentioned about Aurora specifically, and he was like, oh, that reminded me in the dev talk I wanted to bring up about a card that was misprinted in the Aurora Armory deck that has kind of caused this challenge with Aurora Living Legend faster than we anticipated or expected, or having more of a meta impact than we expected. And then he said... he just we didn't offer. He actually just said it. He was just like, Skyward Serenade was meant to be. It was an error on the file when it was sent to print. It was meant to be a 4 option. Actually, he didn't say an error on the file. He said that it was after QA that something happened, so they'd already double checked it, and somehow the bullet point had literally dropped off, and it had go again in the formatting as opposed to being go again as an option. And I think in terms of what that card would do, it would be very different. Like James said it in black and white, of the product was meant to be an additional piece for this new hero that is strong but not fully as powerful as maybe it became with Skyward Serenade, that had access to an armory deck that still had some of those reprints in it, had this new card in the form of Skizik and Skyward Serenade, but was not intended to have that impact, which I thought was obviously very interesting. And then glad that they've finally, a couple of weeks later, come in and directly said it, as they originally intended to do anyway.
Yeah, good call on letting everyone know that, we are not privy to additional information. This was just a by chance thing that happened in a casual conversation. And honestly, I was kind of, like, after you told us that, I was kind of like, oh man, now I have this information, and just to some extent, I don't like that I know it, because I didn't want to be the one to tell anyone, so I just had to like never engage in like discourse around Serenade, because that was happening a lot, right? People like, okay, this card is so good and like busted, and I just had to always be like, yep, yeah, it's busted, and not say anything about it. And it was just a little bit harder to like just like kind of always dodge conversations around it. But I do want to engage in a thought experiment here, Hayden. If the card was printed as intended, with Go Again as an option, do you think Aurora's LL status at this point would be different?
Yeah, I do. I think, maybe if you're a fan of Aggro Blaze, shout out to Zach there, who I know didn't play Skyward Serenade in his Pro Tour London deck, which is frankly crazy. The card is insane. I think it would change, because I think what would have happened is that I actually think it might have changed the landscape of Enigma LLing as well, because I think it warped the meta quite significantly to how you could play into this deck. It made it more consistent. It made the combo more consistent, and it made you be able to play this flex plan between almost like a hybrid deck a lot easier. I think prior to Skyward Serenade, you didn't have as easy access to play, for instance, Face Purgatory, right? Which I think is a really big thing. You also had to, if you wanted to play the combo, you had to almost like lean into it a bit harder. But with Skyward Serenade, you could just draw these kind of insane hands where you're like, well, I have like one Flicker, one Arc. I've already used, like I don't have the Crown of Dominion, for instance, let's say. But because I want to play Face Purgatory in this matchup, but I'm still playing Flicker and Arc. And I can use it because the Skyward Serenade is going to give me an additional like 2 pings off of it. Like it kind of lined up so well. And it also helps you change the resource base of what Aurora could look like. So I think Aurora still would have been strong, and Aurora would still be moving towards Living Legend potentially in this season, if not maybe around, I think probably more likely national season. But I personally think it's really hard to overstate just the impact this card had on also the potential warping of the meta. I don't think it was just what it did to Aurora. I also think it's what it did to the meta for London. And maybe that's like, people might say, well, that's such a, that's a really unfortunate thing that's happened. But also, it's a thing that's happened, and it was interesting in a different way because that happened. So I don't necessarily think it's this terrible tragedy that it happened. It's a mistake, and it led to a slightly, actually not even slightly, a reasonably different meta outcome in my view. But I still think it was one that was interesting. And now we move into a very vastly different meta, albeit with maybe an Aurora that was powerful, but not ultimately as powerful as it became, sitting around through the national season. Obviously, that has some implication to the new player piece with the Armory deck. But if you take that away, which I'm going to admit is a very big thing, I will say that. But if you take that piece away, I think it actually shakes out fairly okay, and in an interesting way.
I think even if it was printed correctly, well, yeah, the thing is, if it was printed correctly, I don't know whether Aurora's. I guess they probably wouldn't play it, and that
some
actually
might
has
have
rippling effects.
But I don't think it would have been very playable.
Yeah, I do wonder whether I think the deck was still very, very strong, and in terms of marquee aggro decks, maybe the Draconic Ninjas get to go toe-to-toe instead of just being like, I'm strictly worse Aurora. But I could still see Aurora LLing by end of PQ season, if not like 2-3 weeks into PQ season. I could still see her LLing by the end of PQ season, despite the misprint happening or not. I think the other underrated part about Serenade being a mainstay is I'd give Aurora 3 more 3 blocks in the form of Skizix, which is just one of those, like the blocking part of it, you don't feel the impact, obviously, when you like go ahead and block with the card. But over the course of many, many games of, say, you playing Aurora in tournament or / even the community playing Aurora, the number of times a 3 block has mattered or like would matter.
It's huge.
It's just hard to quantify and is definitely going to be massive as well. I do also want to come back to your comment about Face Purgatory. Are you high on the card now then? Because I remember when you were discussing it pre-Armory deck having come out and we were discussing the spoilers and we were talking about Face Purgatory, you were a little bit lower on that card at the time. Did that perspective change?
I was really low on Inviscerai, like, to be clear. Like, I thought it was like base, not unplayable, but I thought it was a card that I didn't want in my Viscerai lists post Worlds, really, in the meta that we said, and I didn't think it did the job that I think you just mostly want to play Crown of Providence. I think when we looked at the spoiler season for Aurora, I was like, because people were talking about playing it before then, you know, and I was like, we saw like Sizzle, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, okay, maybe that changes enough. Like, I think it's fine. I do think the card is really powerful. I still was kind of like, yeah, the card was, I definitely came up higher on it in Aurora for sure, especially as the meta started to evolve and develop. But I don't think, like, for instance, I think in Florian, that card is a lot more consistent. So yeah, and I value consistency so high.
It's funny, I feel like Florian sometimes has the opposite problem as Aurora. Aurora sometimes is like, I want to block a Purgatory, but I don't have the non-attack in his hand. Yeah. And Florian, I feel like, is the opposite. Like, I don't have the attack in his hand. It's like 20 attacks in the deck.
Or it's like the 9th plays you need, or it's the Decomposer you need. Like, it is definitely that problem sometimes. But I think the games go longer, so you find better spots with Florian to have impact with your Face Purgatory often.
For sure. Coming back to Aurora, they spoiled something about the next iteration of Aurora, and that she is going to come out 2026, the same set as the High Seas equivalent for that year. So around this time next year, we will probably at least know what the new Aurora does, and then she'll be out a few weeks from now next year. Do you have any thoughts on that, on Aurora being reprinted that quickly?
I need to go and listen.
Well, not reprinted, sorry.
I
didn't correct myself. It's not reprinted. The new version of it, new iteration.
Yeah. So I have some questions. Was it explicit that it's a different Aurora?
You know, I don't remember
I need
word for word. I listened to when the date came out, but I'm pretty sure it's different. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure.
I need to go and listen to
tentative,
this.
Yes.
I need to go and listen to this to see, like, is there some inclination of like, what I gather based on what I saw and like the TLDRs I saw and the notes is that it seems like it has to be a different Aurora, because otherwise people would have picked up on the implications to Living Legend if it wasn't a different Aurora. But I'm going to go and listen to that specifically for some of the wording, because I think in times James and Brian have been really intentional about the words they use in these instances when they talk about these things. But I mean, if I'm going to assume in this case that it's going to be a different Aurora, I mean, I think that's fine. Like, I think if we don't have heroes stick around for long, and there's a couple of things. I think one, if it's going to feel somewhat different, or it's going to have a different, hero ability, it just adds something new to the game, which is interesting anyway. The secondary aspect that I think is really positive is that all those cards that we've just had printed, including this Aurora Armory deck, become viable again for people who own those cards to play with them. So I mean, I'm cool with it. I think if I think about downsides, like I don't really think there's that many downsides, other than potentially it takes away a slot from another new hero to be played. And my question is, how does it, like another new hero that could have taken that spot, for instance? But I think that's pretty minimal. And then my only kind of question is, like, does that do anything to their original plans for the set? I mean, if it's in next year, they should basically be almost finished that set, and like they should be in the last stages of testing that set. So my theory would be more that the hero fit already into the set. So I guess we're getting another elemental set.
I think it also just cements their sort of idea that Aurora is the entryway for new players. which I think is a positive thing. I think it's great. I think they were expecting Aurora to LL in 2025, but probably not now.
Not so quick.
I think they were expecting it to LL probably towards the end of 2025, and then they got to tell the new players, hey, you got your first strike decks, your armory decks. You're going to be able to use them again in like 6 months. Just like wait 6 months, and then you're going to get a new Lightning Rune Blade, and then your path is still there, and the deck you start the game with is all still there. So I'm with you. I'm pretty positive on that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I just had a thought. Like, I guess I could just reprint it as a hero in that set that's like an expansion hero, right? So actually doesn't necessarily mean that it's an elemental set we're getting next year. And they had already pre-planned that Aurora with Living Legend this year, most likely, probably later in the year, like you say, and then we'll bring through another Aurora that has a slightly different iteration. Like, keep the familiarity, keep the lore going with Aurora being this intro hero, change it slightly to give a slightly different feel to these players coming through who have maybe already started with Aurora. And it's kind of like what maybe people might have thought Ira was going to be used for, but Ira doesn't show off all the aspects of what Flesh and Blood is about. So having a talented hero, I think, more uniquely does that. So yeah, I can see that. Makes sense.
Right. I think the only negative, which I don't agree with, to be clear, but the only negative that I saw people like complaining about was that they're like, well, when's Icelander coming back? Or like, when's Dromai coming back? And it's like, I'm not entirely sure if Aurora coming back in 2026 affects the like Icelander Dromai coming back. That to me feels like people want Icelander to come back. I want Icelander to come back too, but I don't see how Aurora coming back sooner like affects the other thing. Like that was the only like sort of hate I was seeing towards this, and I was kind of like, I don't know. It's like I think continuing to have a new player pathway is very, very important, and I think it's great that this is happening. Hopefully, Aurora isn't as how to say it. Like, I want her to be strong. I just don't want her to be as sort of meta warping as she has been the past couple of months, which I'm pretty confident. I think they'll figure out a way.
I think pre-Aurora Armory deck, like Worlds Aurora, was like a really good place for Aurora to be. I think, we're going to talk about bans in a second. I think they would have banned Flicker Wisp at some point. I think they might still do that, depending on like what the next iteration of Aurora looks like. But I think Aurora in general was like quite a nicely designed hero and quite interesting for the game. So,
I mean, to be honest, we just discussed this. Even post Armory deck, it could have continued to be that way had Skyward Serenade not been misprinted, right?
Yeah,
which is something.
Oh, so, that's a point. I actually think they would have banned Flicker Wisp anyway.
So Brian actually mentioned that on the Dev Talk. They were considering.
Yeah. Okay.
They were considering immediately after London. They were considering having like an emergency ban sort of thing, and he didn't say they were, like Flicker Wisp was going to be banned if that happened, but it was a consideration. He was talking about we were considering banning Flicker Wisp shortly after London, which I thought was very, very interesting. And the reason why they didn't do that, and I definitely agree with this, is that they were like, it didn't feel emergency ban worthy. Like if you think about past emergency bans, it was like Starvo, like Awakening, which is, I think that's a very, very, okay, you had to do something about that before Proton New Jersey. And then the other emergency ban was Zen with like the whole Bond stuff, which is again also another very like those were like it's so extremely egregiously outside the power level that should be allowed. That made a lot of sense, and to me, Aurora wasn't quite at that point. And so when they mentioned in the Dev Talk, part of the reason why they didn't go through with an emergency ban for Aurora after London was because she wasn't like it didn't feel like a warranted emergency ban. And I'm paraphrasing what they're saying as well, and I hope I'm not completely misinterpreted what they meant, but that was what I took away from it. I feel I definitely agree with that it didn't warrant an emergency level break glass sort of ban.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think what they would have ended up doing, so let's say either the Armory deck misprint did or didn't happen, it kind of doesn't matter to my point. It does or doesn't happen, but Aurora is in a place where it's not going to Living Legend through ProQuest season, so it's still live for National season. I think they would have banned Flicker Wisp just from a gameplay standpoint. And the reason I think that is because that the format drastically changed with Enigma hitting Living Legend, so I think it felt like the right time to do that. So I think they would have done it.
I'm curious why Flicker Wisp. For me, I don't know if the Flicker Wisp arc combo to me felt like a fine solution for Dirtly decks, especially like post Enigma. To me, I don't. This just sound really weird, but I feel like Electromagnetic Somersault is like the card I want banned. I'm just like, I just hate that the card also like blocks 6. Like that is a 1 card block 6. Like sometimes, like that's the part where I'm just like, does she really need this? Like, is that my thing? Also take away like an instant. Yeah.
Depends on what the philosophy is of like consistency versus random spurts of 40 damage, like 35
True.
damage. Like that's depends on their philosophy of the game, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I mean, if we go back to the book banning, it was the whole idea of egregious offensive overlaps, right? And I think if you're going to say Flickerwisp causes offensive overlaps, I think that's a very, very fair argument. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Especially, it's like no setup. It's like you Arsenal 1 card, you draw the other piece, and you go.
Exactly,
right? Yeah. Next, they had a conversation about the LL system in general. I think this was like the bulk of the conversation. And they were looking at Aurora's ascension to Living Legend so quickly as a bit of a problem with the LL system, which I think was an interesting conversation because to me, the part which I contested with when I was listening to this was I didn't find like the issue was with the LL system, but I think the issue was that Aurora was just slightly out of bounds when it came to power level. And I think if you look back at heroes that have LL'd too quick or ascended too quickly on the LL leaderboard, the same can be said. Where it's just like, it was like from a balance side, like they were balance outliers, and so they were LLing that quickly. And to put the blame on the system rather than the balance of those heroes, to me, was just a curious thing to discuss. I know you didn't listen to you haven't listened to a full dev talk yet, but in your TLDRs or something, did you have any thoughts on that part about it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I actually agree with them on this one because my view is I think we almost kind of just spoke to this, and maybe I was more on this wavelength than you, but because the Armory deck is this like kind of mistake, right? But had the Armory deck not happened, Aurora might have still Living Legend during this ProQuest season. Like it's not out of the question because just remember that Aurora didn't win anything at Pro Tour. It was all Enigma. So let's just say Aurora was still a strong deck, wins roughly the same, but wins through ProQuest season, Living Legends in the last week of ProQuest, or even the first week of Nationals. That's still a really quick Living Legend. So, and I think Aurora, if you take away the Armory deck, I actually think was we kind of both said it, like a pretty balanced hero. So to me, there is a little bit of something there where the system's kind of let Aurora down a little bit in some ways. Like, not massively. I'm not saying it's like a huge, this is a catastrophic failure of Living Legend. I don't think that's true at all, because also they have other ways to work around this, like we just spoke about printing another Aurora. So like it's really not the end of the world. And the heroes are going to Living Legend at different speeds based on the adoption of the hero, how easy the hero is to play. So they're more likely to win local level events like ProQuest and Battle Hardens because of the adoption level of the hero, especially if the product is being pushed. They're also more likely to win a calling as well at that point, in my view, not necessarily a Pro Tour. So I do think, like the Armory deck and kind of the hero balance is like somewhat in question. But actually, I think as well, in this instance, a little bit of the system has kind of failed Aurora to a degree. I wouldn't usually agree with that point. I don't think that's been the case in the past at all. I think it's been, like you say, balance issues that have been the cause of that. In this one, though, I'm like, actually, I kind of agree.
Okay. All right. That's fair. I think I think the only part about the system that maybe I don't say could be improved, but something I do want to point out, which is actually want to shout out Yuha for this, because it was his tweet that actually brought this to my attention, is that different times of the year, different seasons actually have different total number of LL points available in that season. So particularly, I believe this season, this like spring season, has more LL points on the table compared to the winter season.
Yeah.
Right? So, which means that if a hero is strong in this season, they get a disproportionately larger number of LL points than if they're strong during the winter season. So you might be like, oh, this hero ascended like too quickly, but that's just because they were strong during that specific time of the year, rather than they were strong in this other time of the year where there's not that many LL points on the table. I think maybe that's the only part of the system that can maybe lead to people feeling like this hero isn't strong enough for how fast they LL'd compared to some other hero. But it's just because of the timing window in which they were at the top of the meta. I think that's an interesting aspect of the system, and I think if that gets smoothed out a little bit, so it's less like, oh, there's 3,000 points in this season, only 1,000 points in some other season, that could be useful. But I think overall, I do agree with their sentiment in the video as well, that there's a lot of positives to the LL system, and I really enjoy the LL system as well. And they said they aren't giving up on it, and I was very glad to hear that, because I do think the system is very, very good.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. What's how much for a battle hardened? It's 25 points.
25?
Yeah, 25. Do you know what's crazy, right? Is that, and also national season obviously has this big chunk of points because it's 25 points for a non-US nationals, 50 for US nationals, so 25 for a nationals one as well. Do you know what's crazy though? Is like next ProQuest season, say we get an extra like 30 or 40 ProQuest total, the 1,500 points gets divided. This year we were like up, so I think we worked it out last week. We were like 1,600 points or 1,620 points or something because of it. But once we drop over that next threshold, we'll actually be under. We'll be at like 1,400 and something points because of the divided by like the round up or down rule. It'll round down to 2 points per win as opposed to round up to 3 once we push over that that line. And so funnily enough, you'll have like roughly 150 to 200 points less in the next season, and it may well come in, to your point, the second half of the year, which has lower points totals, which is just kind of funny that cadence might actually happen that way. So that might be something that they need to kind of look at, is that rounding up or down piece, because that could, I mean, 150 to 200 points is not a small amount. That's the equivalent of, like we just spoke about, 5, 6, 7 battle hardens or 5, 6, 7 national championships. And if you even remove those points from the second half of the year, to your point about where the points are already kind of separated, that can potentially cause some challenges maybe. So just thought that was an interesting point to add maybe.
That is really funny. I didn't realize that. Speaking of, bans, they also dropped that they're going to start doing more frequent ban announcements. So they did shift the next one forward a little bit. They shifted forward, I believe, about 2 weeks, because now the next ban announcement is going to be May 19th, which is right after spoiler season, by the way. So like, we had a spoiler season, we know what's a nice season, and then there's going to be a ban announcement as well. So that week, honestly, is going to be very, very turbulent, almost. We're just going to get a lot of information in a very short span of time, because we spoiler season for like 3 days, and then a ban announcement, which is going to be interesting. And Brian also said anticipate some shakeups in CC from his ban announcement. So 2 things, I guess, we can discuss for this. First, any predictions? And second, what do we think about just a general philosophy around more frequent ban announcements? Actually, let's start with the second one first before we go into predictions.
Okay.
What do you think of the philosophy of more frequent ban announcements?
This is what I'm really keen to hear from the horse's mouth, and go and watch this part of the dev talk specifically, and probably watch it twice. I think in theory, I am for it, because I think that they can use, especially if it's suspensions, they can use suspensions of cards to kind of manipulate the format. Now, you've got to be careful, right? Like, you've got to hold the trust of the players, right? And so you can't just be like, oh, we don't like this deck right now, so we're going to suspend it. And, like, people be set there being like, well, I can't play my deck anymore. So you've got to be really careful with it. But I think in general, when you come to fresh new metas, sets dropping, it's the time to do this kind of mini shake-up. As we've always said, bans typically have more impact. Living Legends and ban suspensions have more impact than sets themselves often. So I think that's the time to do it, is during this kind of changeover window. Obviously, you've got to be careful. But yeah, I think I'm for it. Like, the one thing I will say, though, is I think what's interesting is it's really hard to predict these things, because I'll use an example. 2-3 months ago, people have sat there bemoaning the fact that Verdance sucks and is a terrible hero and doesn't have, please print, like, I will quote Mr. Caleb Van Patten, Mr. Margin Bay himself. Oh, just print me a decomposed non-attack action. Print me.
Verdance players are still mourning for that, by the way.
Insane.
Yes, please give us a decomposed non-attack Earth card. We need it.
Yeah, they want the hero to be completely and utterly broken, apparently, and to get banned or Living Legend very quickly, apparently. So that's right. So
that's not it. We just want her to feel more like a wizard. But go on.
Okay, sure, that's the reason. But anyway, people were saying like the hero's not playable, the hero's not good, and all of a sudden, Verdance this week and next week might be, if not, one of the 2 best heroes in the meta for the next 2 weeks, right? Like in a very prime position. So I think it's hard to just predict these things, right? Like I think there was a lot of conversation around Rosetta, Earth doesn't feel strong. Like even Florian was kind of like, if you talk about Florian at Worlds, people were like, you were one of these people, right? And rightly so, because I think you were correct. Like Florian just doesn't have the bolts about it right now in this format where MST exists. But once MST goes, which now 2/3 have, the biggest 2/3 have in terms of impact, things change very quickly. So I think it's just a little bit hard to anticipate what these impacts could be, other than things that fundamentally break some of the things that LSS want to do with the game, the enjoyment they want players to have. That's why I cited the Flicker Wisp piece. I think there is another hero that might be on the receiving end of a ban in this shakeup, and it's a wizard.
Okay, so we'll get to that when we do some predictions over here. Just real quick on the Verdance piece, I think while new is still legal, like I think we spoke about this last week as well, and we're gonna get into the main topic. I think it'll be a bit of a triangle where like Verdance does beat Florian. Well, probably.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Yeah.
But new does beat Verdance, so I think we are a triangle in that form. So I don't think she's going to be like busted, but I do think she has a place in the meta. And it is interesting to look back in the previous meta and be like, yeah, these heroes were just unplayable. But yeah, I mean, MST was sort of casting a shadow over like the entire meta, right? They sort of had you should be playing Enigma, Zen. Maybe not Zen, but you should be playing Enigma.
I just think it's important to keep that factor in mind, basically.
Yeah. Coming back to just the general idea of increasing ban announcement cadence, I'm generally for it. I'm generally positive on it. But the main reason I am is that I think a lot of these are just going to go with no changes. Because something that I do like, something that I hope isn't lost, is giving the players space to adapt and to combat the strong meta. Right? Like right now, Florian is strong. But we've like barely seen any innovation, I like when the players have the time to try and solve the format. Like Draconic Ninja is like maybe coming back, and people are like, wait, Draconic Ninja is actually gonna go into Florian. Or some people are like trying to figure that out. Or this whole Verdance Florian sort of dynamic shifts that are happening on both sides, right? I think these are very, very fun times in the game, and I just wanna while I'm positive on more ban restricted announcements happening, I just want to make sure like that part of it isn't lost. And I do sort of trust them to sort of not be too heavy-handed, not be too Big Brother style about it. But I do want to bring that up with being like, part of the reason why I'm positive about it is because I imagine a fair number of them is going to be no changes, and that's kind of why I'm positive about it. Because then it just gives them more opportunities to fix egregious things, right? Instead of being like once every 3 months, they're being like, oh, this thing's egregious, we can only fix it 2 months from now. They just had the chance to hit it earlier rather than later. But aside from that, most of the time, just be like, oh yeah, cool, y'all figure it out, y'all try and combat this. The tools are there for you.
Yeah, I resonate with that so much, and I think now is a perfect example of that. Of like, we're in a place right now where it's like, yeah, let it feel out, right? Like Florian doesn't feel anywhere near oppressive enough to like. It has flaws, it has fundamental flaws and things to attack, right? There's no, I think I could see a world where they do decide like, oh, the consistency is too high, we want to hit something from a consistency standpoint. I don't think they will, but I could see that being a reality. But I think in general, what is more interesting to me in that space is probably the fact of like, yeah, there's times where it's like, no, now is the right time. Now is the right time to do something, because you can already see just the Zephyr Needle, for instance, like the consistency, the power is just like too high, right? So preemptively ban, we don't need to let players figure this one out because they're going to figure out that it's just broken. And I think they've ridden the line on this before, I think, a little bit. I think Bonds is obviously a good example of that as well. So maybe that's one where they've ridden the line, and maybe they timed it rightly, maybe they've left it too long. Yeah, interesting. But
moving on to predictions. Now, I've one main one. It's a mix of a prediction and hope, just pleading. CYB. I just want to card out of here. I just don't like it. We've had this conversation. Here's the thing. I'm not like, oh, because it's like too strong right now or something. But I actually think that's a perfect time to hit something like this. Where it's like when it's not super meta relevant, so people don't get pissed off. They're like, oh, you took away the deck from them. But it's just, why is this card here? So between a prediction and a fair huff of copium. CYB is my prediction. What's yours?
Interesting. I like that card. I think I like strategies that. So one of my favorite things in All Time in Flesh and Blood is when people try and fatigue me. It's like one of my favorite things to play into, and I understand that is not the same feeling that a lot of people have. But I think there is an aspect of the game that should incorporate life gain and having to make skill check decisions about how you navigate a game state that isn't just purely throwing 4 and 5 card hands into your opponent, like setting up, manipulating your pitch stack. Like I like those things. I think there's a real genuine piece of Flesh and Blood that's interesting. I think CYB currently plays into that somewhat. I don't know, like I'm not married to like, oh, it has to stay. It's the most important thing. So I don't know if I necessarily align with it, but I understand people's frustration about that kind of aspect of the game.
I will say those two concepts aren't what's it? They aren't contradictory. You can have fatigue decks in the game while CIB, if CYB is banned, even if CYB doesn't exist. That strategy exists. How do I say? Because I resonate with you on the whole. When there is a fatigue deck, like it is a bit of a puzzle to overcome the fatigue deck, and I think that sort of strategy should have a place in the game as well. Mm-hmm. Which is why, like when you were saying that, I wasn't disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
But I think you can hold that belief while also holding the belief that CYB, could go. Like that's what I mean. Those two statements aren't contradictory.
So what's the problem with CYB currently? Do you think?
I don't like the generic. Like, I think it's fine to have a life gain strategy or like a more blocky, fatiguey strategy. I just don't like that it's generic and everyone has access to it. I think it takes away from the flavor. Okay. I just think it takes away so much from the flavor. I'm just like this because, like when you normally talk about decks, you'll be like, oh, it's like stack Florian. Oh, it's like mid-range Florian. You're still talking about like Runeblade things in a sense, but when CYB comes in, you're gonna be like, this is CYB new, or this is CYB Jarl, and CYB just takes too much of the spotlight for me, and it takes away from the I am playing a Mystic Assassin, or I am playing an Isa the Guardian. It becomes I'm playing a CYB deck, and then my hero and my class and my talent are the supporting cast rather than the main cast, and I don't like that part of it.
I think there's a much more egregious generic card if you talk about that kind of space.
Sink Below? Shelter?
Remembrance.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, yeah.
And that's my prediction. I think that's the card they hit. I think they're going to hit Remembrance. I think that card has lived its time in Flesh and Blood, and I think in terms of having access to that card, it actually limits some of the design pieces for them as well. I think at generic because I agree, having, to your point before about having that life gain strategy and decks, tie it to classes, like you say. I'm also kind of, I agree with you on that, like tie it to the class, build the flavor into it. So I think, especially if you're going to have Necromancer and things like this, and heroes just having generic kind of regrow instant available to them, I think that's my prediction of a card that is very high on the list to be hit.
Yeah, I mean, if that was like a Florian fertile ground build, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's like, okay, cool, that's cool. Like, I'm not opposed to that. But when it's like, oh, anyone can run CYB and do the same thing, I'm just like, oh, that's when it just disillusions me a little bit. Coming back from Remembrance, I could totally see that being a hit as well. I think that card, there have been metas in the past who have already been like, yeah, this card just doesn't need to exist. And I'm not we might be close to the meta again. This isn't the worst Remembrance has been. We've definitely had like the past, I think it was a life gain Oldhim build or something, where I was just like, why? No, oh my god, it was Dromai. It was Dromai Oldhim. Oh my god, which was like a Remembrance
it was the
battle.
Keys to the matchup.
Like,
yeah.
I was like,
so boring.
God, why is this card here? Yeah, that was like the worst time. But yeah, I'm with you. I think I could see that card go as well. Is that the card you were mentioning? Where you're like,
no. No,
okay.
that's open the floodgates.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Because open the floodgates, it is in the realm of egregious overlap, like egregious offensive overlap, while also being not consistent enough. If that makes sense. Like it's just not you're flipping coins, and like, yes, like I agree. I mean, I could see it go as well. I don't sure, but I just wonder whether it hits that mix of power level and consistency to warrant a ban. Oh, but maybe it's just two feels bad and you ban him. Just a perfectly fine reason to ban something anyway.
I honestly think that they ban either that or they finally pull the trigger and they ban Aether Wildfire.
Could be, and then maybe Kano can, and then they give Kano support later on. I'm down for that.
Yeah.
Or I think the other thing they might do is just be like, I think Kano is strong right now.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. So they might do the situation of, you know what, this hero has been problematic, like kind of consistently has been a little bit problematic. There's like, let's just let him ride it out, and then we can, and then we can come back to this maybe instant speed wizard shenanigan later down the line. I think there's two ways for them. Yeah, maybe they can be like, let's curb him now, support him later, or just let him get out of here because he's just. I think it's very, very difficult to balance and design.
Yeah, he's difficult to balance. And then one of their learnings, I think, has to be that they can't predict the speed of Living Legend, right? No matter what they kind of do or how they try and manipulate the formats with cards printed and things like that. So I think they might be better off just being like, no, we take the time now. So either you do it to, what's that card called? Sorry, again, that I just spoke about, the one that draws two cards. I always mix up with Stir the Aetherwell. Is that what it's called?
Open the floodgates.
Open the floodgates. I mix them the same because they look the friggin' same, these cards. That you pull the trigger on that and just say like, actually, this is how we're going to kind of control it. Or you actually just pull Aether Wildfire now and go like, actually, don't worry about it. We're going to support other things in Wizard. We're going to clear the way. And at some point, Kano will Living Legend, but it's not necessarily a priority for us. And look at it that way.
Honestly, I'm down because I do think that card restricts a fair amount of Wizard design space. Like, it is just so hard to come up with like, to play instant speed wizards, like wizards that actually do things on the opponent's turn when that card exists. So I'd be down for that. I could see that being a design restrictor, sort of like what Berserk was, right, for brutes. Yeah, where they're like, it's just too restrictive on the design space, so they got rid of it. One last thing to cover. Sorry. Go on.
Oh, is there any other cards just that stand out to you that might?
Honestly, I kind of just want to talk about CYB, and I'm definitely with you on the Remembrance side. I'm gonna place a lower probability on them hitting Wildfire, but I could see it. Nothing else really sticks. If Aurora was still around, I would say freaking Electromagnetic Somersault, but nothing else really sticks out to me. Is there anything else for you?
I think there's a few things that are on the fringes, but I think we can leave that for another time.
Last thing I want to cover regarding the dev talk is they had a brief conversation about ELO. And they dropped that ELO's days are numbered and that it will be gone by 2026, which I think in general the community has been very, very happy about, been positive about. It did feel like ELO was for two reasons. One, there's a lot of variance in this game. And for the second reason is that this isn't sort of game you can just go grind out online, right? Your ELO shifts happen just typically at like these events that you can go play at once every, like depending on the season, you can play like once every week at a PQ, but more than usually the most ELO shifts that happen like 4 or 5 times a year, the Pro Tours and Nationals. And because of the variance and because of how rare your ELO shift actually happens, I think a lot of people will agree that this wasn't a very satisfying system for what it was trying to achieve. So I think a lot of people are pretty positive on ELO going away by the end of this year. By the start of next year, I guess. Yeah,
I'm pretty indifferent. I think as long as they've got a system for ensuring that you can recognize players for their tier 3 and tier 4 performances. So whether that's something equivalent to like a pro point system. Are you going to say the player of the year? I don't think that the leader of the year thing or whatever is a good way to do it. But yeah.
No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say, okay. I mean, also qualifiers. Like, I think... Like you said, tier 3 and tier 4, but I think also Pro Quests and RTNs, which is like ELO currently affects those, or like gets affected
for
by
qualifying.
Those. I think continuing for that, like your ELO can change in RTNs and PQs. I think that is still good. Like having them be rated, and having them contribute to the new system somehow is, I think, still important. Not just tier 3 and above. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the system ultimately looks like, to be honest. So I'm indifferent. We'll see what they come up with. I'm happy for them. I'm fine for it to stay. I'm fine for them to change it. I think as long as they've got something, and if they feel they can come up with a more robust way that's going to please a greater number of players, go for it.
Yeah. The big thing that they were trying to hit was that oftentimes some people feel like they don't want to play at an event because the ELO might drop from it, and then that will take away their guaranteed qualification to their Nats or the next Pro Tour. And so that aspect of the system where sometimes players are discouraged to play in events is something they definitely want to target with the new system. And
it's so tiny. I've heard that argument. I think that argument is kind of whatever, honestly. I think that argument is like so minuscule. It packs like, because, okay, so you, to have that frame of mind, you have to think that you're not going to be able to perform and also the pro quest, like you have to be, okay, first of all, you have to be near the cusp of dropping enough elo that you can actually fall out of the qualification, which is, you have to be fairly close to the cusp to be able to do that, because even if you O2 drop in a pro quest season at that cusp level, you're probably going to drop around 20 elo max, like probably more like 15, 16 elo. So you have to be really close to the cusp. Then you also have to not want to like play Flesh and Blood at that point for whatever reason. You also then have to not have like a PTI you're happy to use, and you have to have not had any other way to qualify. I just think that point is kind of whatever, honestly. It impacts so few people that I just think it's kind of like, it's kind of such a whatever point.
I think if you're going to frame it around pro quests, I can see where you're coming from. But when it discourages people from playing in battle hardens and callings, which I've also heard, that's when I think it should be addressed.
Okay. Same thing. I also think that point is crazy. Like you should be like, do you not want to win a calling? Like why? What? Like I don't understand that conversation. Like if you're near the cusp, if you're like one of the 10 people, okay, whatever. But like, what? Do you not think you can win games of Flesh and Blood? Like I really don't understand that conversation.
Well, that's where the whole like card game variance thing comes in, right? You can have a bad streak, and then suddenly because of the bad streak, you had a couple of rough games of the calling, and because of that, you now need to spend a PTI to qualify for the Pro Tour. I mean, I definitely agree
isn't
with
that the point of PTIs?
Addressing that. Well, I mean, because then your decision to enter the calling is no longer, hey, I'm going to try and win this calling. Their decision is, wait, if I don't do so well, I need to effectively spend the cost of a PTI to go play.
And there we get to the real root of the problem, I think, which is, I think the system around being able to gift PTIs, I think, is what plays into that, because now PTIs have a monetary value as opposed to being value of, oh, here's my backup if I do fall out of this elo system. That's just my view. So
well, I mean, even if it wasn't, though, that's still a resource that you wouldn't have needed to spend if playing this event that you want to play at didn't drop you out of.
But don't play Flesh and Blood. I don't understand that conversation. Like, if you want to play Flesh and Blood, like play Flesh and Blood. If you don't want to play Flesh and Blood, then don't play Flesh and Blood. Like, I can understand that it might be a decision point for 10 to 15 people a season. I just can't understand it beyond that in terms of like, oh, I'm currently ranked 10. What if I'm ranked 30th after that? Okay, but what if you win the calling? Like everything, like that's the same thing of being like, oh, if you don't win the calling, you had to pay to like go to the calling and pay for your accommodation. Yeah, like that's going to be the same case every single time. You have to pay to go and play the event. You have to pay to enter the event. If you want to start to like put it down to like, oh, different elements of gambling, like you're playing a card game. Like
Yeah, and it's an added thing. It's an added thing you're gambling for, which you didn't necessarily sign up for, right? I feel like that's a point of view I can see.
I think maybe we leave this one, honestly. Like I don't understand. I've just heard this conversation so many times, and it just infuriates me when people bring it up, because I think it's just such a silly conversation. Like honestly, I'll play Flesh and Blood or don't play Flesh and Blood. Like I don't care. You can decide what you want to do. But whenever someone messages me and they're like, "Oh, should I play this pro quest? Like I'm currently like 40th on like the national rating, but if I like O2 this, I might be 60th. I might not get my national qualification." Well, okay, do you think you're good enough to win nationals? Yeah, I want to play nationals. I think I'm good enough to win nationals. Then play Flesh and Blood. Like I don't get
it. Yeah, okay, yeah, but I will just say that I think the fact that you get these messages and I've heard a lot of these discourse, I think it affects more than 10 to 15 people a season. I think the effect of it is a little bit more wide ranging, and I think right, you see it happen a lot. It's like I think there's enough people where it's just like, you know what, maybe this should be addressed. But
I
fair enough. All right,
we've got like 10 minutes. We've got like 10 minutes left. So because I have a hard stop on this podcast, which usually I wouldn't say, but I do have a hard stop on this podcast. So I think let's talk some classic constructed results from last week and talk about maybe one or two of the key things that happen for this coming weekend and next before we get to high seas.
Sounds good. So main topic is Feral, Aurora, and talking about the CC things. So Aurora won most pro quests last weekend, 44, and then Florin was close second at 37. So more than half of the pie has been Runeblade. And sure, we won't go over most of the other results. I mean, okay, there's assassins afterwards, like Nu and Arachne Marinette were right under the two of them, but significantly far away enough that it's mostly Aurora and Florian. Now, question is, post-Aurora LL, biggest question, who fills the aggro void? Is there going to be a new aggro? Is there an aggro deck powerful enough to take that void, or are we just going to go into a mid-range fatigue soup? So I think where we want to start this conversation is Draconic Ninja. Where are they post-Aurora? Definitely, I think we're both aligned that they are a step down from Aurora, for sure. There's a reason they weren't being played before while Aurora was around. But are they strong enough to come up and compete in this field? Particularly, I think the question is, are they good enough to beat Florian?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the piece is like, okay, I've been pretty vocal on this pod the last couple of weeks. I think Florian is, one of the two best decks in the format right now. And I think 37 wins last week as Aurora sunsets into Oblivion, for a year at least, I think kind of shows just how strong Florian is, and I think will continue to be the number one win share deck next week, this week and next week. Like I feel personally pretty confident with that. I think the hero is just so well rounded and consistent. So I would start with, to your point, do the Draconic heroes, the Draconic ninjas have a good matchup to Florian? I've been playing some games. I don't think they do, which is tough.
Question, which Fi, I think, pretty much only has one build, but which version of Syndra were you playing against? Were you playing against the one that had enough blues to swing kunais regularly, or were you playing the more redline build that was like popular in Memphis?
No, I think you've got to play I personally think you've got to play the one that can support kunai swings, because that's how you get around Florian. Like, you've got to present small, wide damage, because otherwise you bring their defense reactions into play too much. You want to force them to...
Agreed.
Yeah. So I think that's the version you have to play. So that's the version I've tested against.
Interesting. And and it also gives you access to Spreading Flames, which I think is another key piece you need for the Earth heroes, where you need to overpower them, right? With stuff like that. Okay, I mean, I think you have more experience on this than me, so I will defer to you. But I will just say, I think there could be more setup-y stuff that the ninjas could lean into. Like Energy Potion, I think in particular, is one
Agility,
that I'm
like a lot.
You like it?
I do, yeah.
That was something I just theory crafted a week or two ago when we discussed it. So EPOP Prowess and Agility, I wonder whether that could be good enough for them to beat the Florians alongside...
Maybe.
There's a lot of just... Like, Florian does have prevention effects, right? Like the Haunting Rendition. Oh, I guess the other thing is coming back to adapting on the other side. I wonder whether Florian now plays more Seeds of Tomorrow than they did in the previous meta to help deal with the... You think so?
Yeah. I think it's good against Wizard as well.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of chip damage. But I mean, I think Syndra relies a lot on like the flick knives interactions to just like guarantee damage. And if Florian has more prevention effects, Haunting Renditions, Seeds of Tomorrow, maybe they can adapt back on the other side and then deal with the Draconic ninjas.
Yeah, I think don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad matchup for the Draconic ninjas. I think it's an interesting matchup. I think I could see ways where we adapt even more. Maybe people find some builds that are a little more streamlined and they can make the matchup favored into Florian. Like at the moment, to me, it feels like it's slightly Florian favored, not massively, just from experience. But I think as well, there's more iteration to come on both sides. You spoke about Seeds Tomorrow. You spoke about like Price Agility, EPOT. These are all interesting things to me. So I don't think it's a clear cut and dry like they aren't. But I think if you don't immediately go, oh, they just naturally line up really well, that kind of tells me a lot about what that matchup could be.
Interesting. I feel like I would say they naturally line up well into a Dirtly deck that isn't like ice based.
Florian is not a Dirtly deck though. Let's get this clear. Florian is not a Dirtly deck.
Yeah, okay. He's slower though. He's not a fast deck.
But he's not Dirtly.
Unless unless something drastically changes.
And attacking into him is what Florian wants to do. Like, Florian wants you to attack into him so that he can decompose as quickly as possible and then just turns into a pure monster of value. Like, that is Florian's current number one game plan in this meta. So you have to be you have to really find your windows. You have to really, like, yes, giving them, like, finding spots to give them 4 and 5 card hands is actually good. You just have to find the right spots to do it. And then ensuring you understand, like, the phases of the game into Florian, because there's 2 real key phases. There's pre-decompose and there's post-decompose. And if you're trying to play on a kind of like a more aggressive value plan post-decompose, it's really tough. Like, you have to be so far ahead for that plan to be good. So, yeah, I think just wanted to really reiterate, like, Florian is, like, for those that have been playing the deck, like, it is not dirtly. It is not, and I think a lot of matchups you're playing Reaping Blade now as well. You're kind of going back to more of this kind of proactive decomposing deck.
I definitely agree with that. And also, I think, coming back to adapting on the Florian side, I think if the Draconic Ninjas become a serious problem for Florian somehow, I mean, Erase Face is a card that's very, very good into them. And I could see Florian's... Like, there is more tech on the other side as well.
For sure.
To keep finding. So
One question I have about... We spoke about who fills the aggro void. And there's, like, I thought about some of these other heroes as well. So Dash is one that's previously been interesting as a very aggressive deck. Obviously, Dash IE. Obviously, it's lost High Octane. Dash IO, similar problem, lost High Octane, right? Dash IE can play an aggressive into mid-range plan, though, which is kind of interesting to me, I think, honestly, because can you have a plan where you're like, actually, I don't have to attack Florian to give them value to the decompose. I can set up all these chambers and items, and then I can play a better value game because I'm online before they're online. I don't know. That's just a theory. But I think the problem with trying to play an aggressive mech deck into Earth is that they just defend so well. So I don't think that's good. But it might be good into some of the other heroes, for instance.
yeah, I think that item dash build is potentially worth looking at as well. Yeah, I think I could reasonably expect you to be more consistent coming online before the Florian does, and then that helps a lot. And also, you are fine with the damage Florian's dealing you. Like, you can... Like, that deck at least has more blues, and you can actually also deal with Arcane, which I think is very, very useful. And you have inbuilt AB as well, right?
Yeah. What about brutes? What about aggressive brutes, though? Like, this is the question that you spoke about my coping on Rhinar. I do wonder if aggressive brutes that present a lot of damage and disrupt defense reaction and blocking hands are a really good place to be right now.
I actually think Levi is good into Florian.
Yeah.
I know you're
It probably
gonna
is.
just hate me for this or just absolutely disagree, but I actually do think Levi is good into Florian. Yeah, and then I think we touch on Verdance a little bit. I think Jury is still up in the air in terms of, both sides are adapting. I will say, though, I mean, I said this earlier as well, I'm going to stand by that I think Verdance is favoring to Florian.
Sure. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, but I mean, there's still a game to be played. It's not a slam dunk, and a lot of the onus is on the Verdant side.
Yeah, and they're adapting well.
Needs to understand that. Yeah,
that makes sense.
So yeah,
the only one I had a question for you about is
answers.
like, is Nu actually that good into Verdance though?
Yes.
Okay.
That just straight up it is because so you can have AB3 Spell Void 2, so you don't get chipped down that much from like arcane stuff, and then you can obviously block very well. It's sort of the case where the Verdance gives you space and you can punish them for it because you're like disrupting them, and the Verdance tries to combo. Well, it's very difficult to combo into Nu because he's going to silence call your potions away or hit banishes off the top that hit your combo pieces, target your graveyard with stuff and then making your plume useless as well. So it's just. But I will say Verdance are adapting. The triple evergreen is actually good into Nu. It at least takes away impacts a little bit the fatigue axis that Nu has into Verdance. I have seen Verdances win the Nu matchup by just like looping evergreens in the end, and then Verdance is drawing a bunch of chi and then can't block it, or needs to spend the blocking cards, and after they die or they get fatigued because all they have is chi now, and then Verdance looping evergreens. The other thing about evergreens is that it doesn't end up in your yard unless you like block with it. So it's very difficult for Nu to disrupt that as well. It's not blue, so she can't Nu it off the top, and then it goes back to the deck, so she can't target it in your graveyard, and then it's difficult.
You just gotta run them out of blues at that point, effectively.
Yeah, but that's easy. It's not easy. So I think the evergreen tech does help the matchup a little bit, but I will say Nu is favored just because it's very difficult to do the combo stuff, and Nu does sort of force you into have some sort of long-term game plan because she blocks you so well on the arcane front and the physical front.
Yeah. This is probably the first time in Flesh and Blood history we've not had a real premier aggro deck, though. Which is very interesting.
But I guess the question is, I think the Lexi Dromai meta, the Lexi Dromai Oldhim meta was the other one, where the question is, did you consider Lexi a premier aggro deck? It did feel a little bit different in a sense. Okay.
Sure, I mean it's different, but it's still it was a robust aggressive deck. I would consider Aurora to be somewhat different.
Worlds Barcelona. There was no premier aggro deck.
Oh,
like Phi 1,
will
but
too.
he was not a...
I agree.
But he wasn't a premier... I was like, there was definitely one other meta we had.
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
like this.
That's probably the most similar to a meta, it feels like, actually. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah,
what's
it was
the
Draw My Icelander. Well, I guess, Florian Verdant. I think
one
this,
of the
I don't think this is... I don't think...
There's
I
also
think
an
this meta is
illusionist.
similar to... This meta is similar to that one in that we don't have a premier aggro deck, but I think it is different in that I think we do have a bit of a triangle. I'm expecting a triangle of Florian Verdants and New, at least so far. And then the Draconic Ninjas, I actually think have the potential to come and disrupt this triangle and do something.
Arachne's quite interesting to me. Arachne Marionette is actually quite
Which
interesting to
one?
me.
Okay, because, I think the next thing we want to go to is the Assassins. Mostly Marinette, and actually Slippy as well. I think Slippy is interesting. Let's start with Marinette. Go on. Like, what do you mean by interesting? Are you talking about the sort of dagger sideboard plan that Tao popularized?
I don't even know. I think there's something in Marionette's like power level. Like, there is definitely something there. I'm not 100% sure exactly what the right strategy is. One thing I will say is I think it personally, like having played quite a bit of Marionette, what felt weak to me is having to invest resources into your daggers. That felt not good to me. And I understand that one of the ways people have tried to combat that as well, make sure the daggers hit right, like spend pumps on your daggers. But because this is quite a mid-rangey format and there's not a lot of ways to punish defense reactions, I think defense reactions are quite valuable, right? So I don't know. I don't love popping resources into things that can get countered by depending on how my opponent plays or how they draw. I want a more of a consistent strategy if I'm going to play something like Marionette. I don't know if it's there, but I think the hero is powerful enough that it's interesting to me to kind of see if it is.
So I actually think the dagger pumps are good into defense reactions because it makes a dagger come in for 5. And dagger for 5 is very, very annoying to block, also because they have piercing as well. So you can't just like, hey, here's 1 block armor and a D react. So dagger for 5, whether you have defense reactions or not, is taking 2 cards from you if you want to block it out. And it's not an efficient 2
You're also
card
giving
block
2
either.
cards, though. You're also giving 2 cards. This is
Sure.
the problem I have with Marionette. Like,
Sure.
you just start trading 2 cards for 2 cards into decks that have the flexibility to decide when they do and do not care about it.
So, but okay, here's the thing. Okay, you have a defense reaction in Arsenal, right? Mm-hmm. And dagger coming in for 5. Like, how are you blocking that? Like, are you giving 2 real cards from your hand, or 1 current defense reaction and overblocking this thing, and then losing your defense reaction for something that might come afterwards? Like, I actually think the dagger for 5 poses like an annoying enough problem that I actually do think the dagger pump build is pretty strong.
I mean, it depends what I want to do with my hand. Because I have that luxury of
course.
deciding.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And I think the dagger pump is annoying, but it's mostly annoying to the decks that it's like Marionette's already good into. I don't know. I'm not sold on the dagger pump piece actually being good. Personally, I don't think that's good fundamental flesh and blood. But
the other thing that deck does is actually get to the setup of Clave and Kalystra very, very quickly. Like, it runs like 6 orb weavers.
That is powerful. That is powerful.
And that setup is, I think that's the other piece that we haven't talked about. And I think that maybe, hopefully, alleviates your issue with spending resources into dagger, because now you actually have the one floating to swing the Kalystra or do it the other way. So
that is more interesting to me. But I don't know if you need to have dagger pump build to do that. I think there's ways you can just naturally do that through Flick Knives and through the other cards that give you the Chalicerer, I think.
It just works so well together, though. And then you save a Bloodshed, Kalystra for 5, go again, and it's just like, oh,
well, Save a Bloodshed is just a busted card. Like, I'm playing that either way. Like, I'm not playing Save a Bloodshed. But what I'm talking about is like,
all right,
scar tissue and these
cut
things.
from the same cloth.
Okay. Cut from the same cloth. That's like this.
They also really work well with Kiss of Death. But all right, okay, well, we can leave that aside. In terms of the Marinette piece, I want to talk about Slippy for a little bit.
Sure, you got 2 minutes.
Slippy. Yeah, exactly. This is why I was like trying to speed run this. I think Slippy, now that they're moving away from pick to pieces and adding backstabs in, I'm curious about Slippy's Earth matchup. I think because they also have the Spinneret stuff, which is something they are also doing, where they want to get to Clave Kalystra, and I think that I want to that sort of build like 6 backstabs. You get a Kalystra Clave setup as soon as possible. Whether you can play a game into Florian with that, and yeah, I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested. The other thing I was going to say about backstabs, I'm actually interested in backstab and Marionette as well. But I am like interested in what Slippy can do, because I also think you just naturally are good into the Draconic heroes as well. So like the Syndra Fly. So if you can find your spot to take advantage of these, like, oh, you want to decompose with Rootbound Carapace? Well, I'm just gonna, like, honestly, I might even test 9 backstabs. Like, it might sound crazy, but it might be worth a test.
Yeah, I could see it. Real quick, last minute. What's up with Warrior? Was that just a Rothamel diff like this past?
You don't need a minute. You don't need a minute on this thing. I don't know what's up with Warrior.
Okay.
Nothing good, I don't think.
I wasn't sure how Kasai beats Aurora, and honestly, I don't even know how it beats Florian, because Florian's blocking with a whole bunch of non-attacks and is sending Arcane at you. I'm not fully sure. It was a bit more of an aggressive Kasai build in terms of having like 9 draw swords.
Yeah.
It also has Seduce Secrets, which is interesting. So it's more aggressive, maybe. I don't fully understand.
I'll give you the theory.
We might just need it to shake
I'll give you the theory.
You'll need to shake it out a little bit more.
Draw swords, power through your deck, be more aggressive, raise an army before they can be the value decomposed deck. The problem is that assumes that the Florians are playing this more defensive kind of style, and that's just not reality, I don't think. So I played a couple of games and was like, yep, I don't get it.
Also, actually, we somehow missed past this, but best deck in format is Kano, and with that, I think we can call. But Kano is obviously very, very strong right now.
Kano is either the best deck in the format or completely unplayable, depending on how your game goes. That is my feeling every time I play Kano right now. Is it either feels insane or it just feels disgusting in a bad way.
Well, I will say I think that might be a little bit tainted from what Kano's had to do to combat Aurora, which is go into 9, open the floodgates.
Oh my gosh.
But now,
yeah.
But now that Aurora is gone and they don't need to play it that sort of high roll to beat Aurora, I wonder whether they can go back. And actually, Margin brought this up in his latest World Tour Weekly. It's like, wonder they can just go back to like the Aether Spindle type stuff that they did and just kind of just like stack these Earth heroes, and then what are they going to do? I think that angle of Kano, especially if the Draconic heroes come back, where it's like they don't have Spell Void 2 like Aurora did, I think that version of Kano might actually just be an actual mainstay in this meta.
Yeah, it's more consistent. I think Kano's good. Yeah. I understood the thing that people did to play against Aurora and not play Aether Spindle, but I'm at the point where you don't play Aether Spindle, you should just not play this hero, personally.
I do like the card.
That has been episode 212 of Arsenal Pass. Many discussions on this dev talk. Pankaj managed to get me riled up about Elo, which I didn't think wasn't on my bingo card, but good job there.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that either. I was like, whoa.
I just feel like it's one of those discourse things that pops up every now and again. I'm like, why is this discourse? But yeah, we're going to see something change. So fine. I'm happy for LSS to do what they think is best on that one. This meta this week and next week is going to be interesting as we head towards high seas. And then, of course, I will be in Taipei for high seas. You will be at US Nationals watching the very first weekend of Classic Constructed with high seas. So it's all to play for in these next couple of weeks. If you are playing ProQuest over these next 2 weeks, best of luck. Wish me luck. Still need my invite for Singapore. And otherwise, we will see you next week on the pod.